Well, Rudy, I've been saying now for a long time, a lot of people blame or put a lot of the weight on John Gotti for what I consider the destruction of the mob the way I knew it during my era. And I say, no, that's not true. It was the RICO statute, the RICO indictments that really crippled the mob as we knew it back then, my former associates. And I say that until this day. It wasn't Gotti. There were a lot of people that were out high profile like that. Joe Colombo was like that. A lot of guys were like that. Didn't bring the mob down. It was really the effective use of the RICO statute that did it. And especially
they were much more powerful
than
John Gotti.
Yeah.
Those people you just mentioned, and your father, were much more actually powerful than John Gotti. I mean, John Gotti was great public relations, and he was a very dangerous man. But by the time he was around, you were in the epilogue of the Mafia. The really brilliant ones were gone. The ones who, like Joe Bonanno, did it for 30 years and nobody even knew. They thought he was a nice Italian businessman. And then he got outed at Appalachia. That's 30 years of making millions with nobody knowing. He wasn't stupid like John Gotti to act like a gangster. And that would have been the old mobsters. Frank Costello, who used to date MacArthur's wife after she died when she was a widow. The judge that I clerked for prosecuted Frank Costello, which is how I kind of got all involved in it. And his wife one day was on the elevator because he wasn't without bail at trial, unlike the J6 defendants. He was out on bail because we have rights in America, even for Frank Costello. So the judge's wife, Mrs. McMahon, gets on the elevator with, at that time, the most notorious mafia guy in America, all over the newspapers, right? He had sort of taken over for Lucky Luciano. He was his guy when Lucky went off to Italy. She was frightened to death. She was shaking. I think this fellow said, Mrs. McMahon, you don't have to be nervous. I'm not going to hurt you. And we're not going to hurt your husband. Now, I disagree with him, but I respect him. In fact, I wish he were my lawyer. He's a very good lawyer. You can tell him that. And then he walked out. She went back and told the husband, I hope you don't convict him. What a nice guy. What a nice guy. Now, maybe he wasn't, but he knew how to put it on.
Well, it's funny. I mean, they called him the prime minister. He was, if there was any boss that you had to model yourself after, I think it would have been Frank Costello, because he knew how to work both ends. So, like you just said, perfect example of that,
Yeah, he's the model, I say, for that little expression or scene in The Godfather where one of the other Godfathers says, well, you have all the judges and politicians in your pocket and you have to share them. So he had all the judges and politicians in his pocket, virtually controlled the New York Democrat Party through Carmine DeSapio. There's a telephone call of him and a judge that the Kefauver Commission got, where the judge thanks him for his appointment. The head of the mafia or the head of the Lucchese family being thanked for an appointment to being a judge. Oh, my God.
Those were the good old bad days, I used to say.
I mean, they had great problems, and they had some. Everything comes with plus and minus, Michael.
But how did you come up with that whole concept to go after the commission the way you did? I mean, that was groundbreaking.
See, I knew Professor Blakey, and spent time with him when he was writing the RICO statute. I knew his overall intent to go after the crime business, and I was the third-ranking official in the Justice Department under Ronald Reagan, but I always wanted to be the U.S. attorney. And I asked the president to demote me so that I could go back to New York. And with the help of lots of people, I became U.S. attorney. As I was preparing, I read Joe Bonanno's book. In the book, he's got a chart. And the chart shows the commission, as he conceived it, from the day it was formed, like the early 30s, with him as one of the family heads, and Lucky Luciano and several others. And then he has a chart going down to 1963, I believe. I looked at that and I said, oh my goodness, he just defined a RICO enterprise. All I have to do is take it from 63 to 81, fill in the families. I got a RICO case. And that's how it started.
So Joe Bonanno gave it to you, basically.
I put it on a chart. I put down at the bottom who the FBI thought was the head of the families now. And then I went back to the attorney general and the head of the FBI 3 months later, and I said, I can get them all, but I have to fill in spots here. And we're going to have to do a lot of electronic surveillance. So you're going to have to give me FBI counterintelligence agents because they're better burglars than burglars. I mean, they'll get into every building they have to get into, and they'll wire it. And that's the group that got into Castellano's library. It videotaped and audio taped Castellano's car, Dux Corralo's car and office. The best one of all was Fat Tony, who it took us 4 months to get in to his place on Pleasant Avenue. You know what he did, Fat Tony? Because he was actually a strange guy. Something very decent about him. He let his people go for Thanksgiving. He didn't have his place guarded for Thanksgiving. No. And as an Italian American or whatever, I had the hunch that he was going to do that, and I got the judge to extend it. And the FBI went in over Thanksgiving weekend and wired it for sound and for video, except the video never worked. Matty the Horse Iannello, we videotaped his office where he used to settle the disputes regarding carding. Matty the Horse was well respected by a number of the families, and they would get into carding fights because private carding in New York was controlled 100% by the Mafia. If you got near it, they'd kill you. And the big companies, US Waste, whatever, they tried to come in. Yeah, want your legs broken? Fine. But they carefully fought themselves over routes. So you can have somebody in the Lucchese family and somebody in the Bonanno family, and the Lucchese family comes down from the Bronx or Manhattan into Brooklyn, and they take over a carding route because they have a friend. But it really is in the territory, it's really in the territory of the Bonanno family. Now, these two guys would ordinarily shoot it out. They decided this was very wasteful, a real problem, and everybody trusted Matty, and they put Matty in charge. And I can't remember if it was a Tuesday night or Wednesday night, he'd hold court in an office they bought just for that purpose, which we had wired. And the tapes someday should be released. They're hilarious. You know, the guy from the Bronx gets up and says, "You took my route." And the other guy says, "No, you took my route." And they almost get into a fight, right? I'm gonna effing kill you. And Matty would say, no. We're here to settle this. And then he would settle it. He'd say, well, you get the route, and you've got to give him this, and you got to give him that. And any screw up, that's when we got a problem. And they all listened to him because he had the backing of the commission. It was a brilliant thing to do. Horribly illegal, but brilliant.
You were so far ahead of us. We didn't keep up with technology back then. You know, a lot of guys didn't get it. You know, they just didn't.
Yeah, and you know, the technology then was so infantile. In a different, it was a semi-mafia case, a police corruption mafia case. But my undercover guy had the device on, talking to a low-level mobster who they were trying to entrap, you know, and turn him in a bribery case. And the thing went on fire. The device was here. The guy rolled out of the car and burned his whole chest. Oh, we got him back eventually, but it took about 6 months to clear his burns. And I don't know how he excused his way out of it. Another time, when we were going after Fat Tony for police corruption, we had wired his place. And the detective, who was the undercover guy, walks in and says hello to him. And then you hear the detective on all the television sets. He says, "Hey, Tony!" And you hear, "Hey, Tony!" And they all look around. And the guy is smart enough to say, "Those effing FBI, they had to wire this damn place, Tony. Aren't you careful about your place?" And he walks out.
That was a good cover. Very good.